Hello, everybody. This is Kevin here. This is going to be my third attempt in trying to do this stream. I've been going through a lot. Your guy right here has been going through a lot trying to make sure that I could do this stream. I've been having, I guess I'm having some CPU challenges and I guess network challenges too. The network signal isn't really as strong as I would like for it to be. But nonetheless, we're going to try yet again to do this particular live stream. If this means that I may have to turn off my camera so that way that we are able to have a better CPU and see how that works, then so be it. But for the time being, let's just go ahead and get started with this particular video. This video is focusing on the port strikes that's on the East Coast and how this will lead to how this is participating in the economic destabilization, and how this could potentially be a part of Agenda 2030. Now, for those of you guys know, I've been talking about 2030. I think this is something that we are currently in right now, despite the fact that people are more focused on other things that are going on. Me personally, I think that we are supposed to be more focused on what is happening after the election, not necessarily what is happening currently right now. Sometimes like you have to think of the mindset of the future. And one of the ways you can try to dictate, or not necessarily dictate, but have an idea or predict of what could go on for what's happening right now, what we could be leading on for the future, is focusing on what is happening today, particularly as there are plans set in motion for Biden and like eventually Kamala Harris for what is 2030. Now, the reason why we're bringing this up because it's going to play a whole lot of a role within the economic destabilization, and more specifically right now, what is happening with the port strikes and the support between the International Longshoremen Association with the United States Maritime Alliance, and the breakdown that is happening, and the president choosing not to interfere in anything as they try to reach a solution. All right. So before we get into this topic, make sure that you hit the like button and make sure that you are able to share this out to anyone who will need to see this. Again, if we run into technical issues, we're just going to roll with it and see how things turn out. I'm really trying to just do my best to make it through so that way we're still having content on this platform. Let's see here. We'll still have content on this platform so that way that we were able to do what we need to do to keep the channel going. All right. Make sure though, if you are new here, click this the subscribe button and click the notification bell so that you are alerted every single time there is a new video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this topic of the port strikes. All right. So this one right here is about all the events that have led up to October 1st, where the strikes started happening on the ports. All right, so here we go. This is on ChatGPT, by the way. So it says the port strikes on the U.S. East Coast, which began on October 1st, 2024, were primarily driven by unresolved labor negotiations between the International Longshoremen Association, ILA, and the United States Maritime Alliance, USMX. The key issues at the heart of the strike include demands for strike wage increases, concerns over job security in the face of automation, and the distribution of container royalties. Negotiations between the ILA and the USMX broke down after the ILA rejected a proposal for a near 50% wage increase, arguing that it did not sufficiently address job security and automation concerns. The ILA is demanding a $5 per hour wage increase for each year of the new contract and strict protections against the automation of port jobs, which they see as a major threat to workers' livelihoods. This strike is the first of its kind on the East and Gulf Coast in nearly 50 years and has impacted 36 major ports, to include those in New York, New Jersey, and Houston. This strike could severely disrupt the U.S. supply chain, particularly affecting goods like electronics, automobiles, and perishable items. Experts estimate that this strike could cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars daily if there is it continues to prolong for a period of time. All right, so there is that. So before I get into other aspects of the conversation, we're going to get into some videos to watch. In fact, let me go ahead and start presenting my screen, and let me turn off my camera to see if that is going to help with issues with the video. All right. All right, so give it just a moment. All right, so clearly, so here you can see my chat GPT here. So let's go ahead and get into port strike day 2.
Another national story with local implications is the ongoing port strike.
Takes time to load.
Philadelphia, Wilmington are taking part and are vowing to stay on that picket line 24/7 until a deal is reached. Action News reporter Corey Davis has been following the walkout from the start. He's back live at the Packer Avenue Marine Terminal for day 2. Good morning.
Sam, good morning. Experts are saying it's going to take several weeks before the everyday person starts to actually feel some type of change with all of this. And behind us here, we have the dock workers. They are members of the International Longshoremen's Association. More and more of them are gathering out here this morning. This is the second day of no longer loading cargo on and off ships at ports from Maine to Texas. Experts continue to tell us that even with this work stoppage, it'll be several weeks before the impact is felt by the everyday person.
The strike goes on for more than a month or so, we will start seeing the price increase as well for those kind of items. The consumers are the key factor here. Don't get panic. Don't get into the panic mode.
And Dr. Subbu Kumar of Temple University follows supply chain stability and says the strike didn't catch companies off guard. A lot of retailers were able to stockpile goods to hold them over, but analysts also say a strike of more than a few weeks will stress the supply chain around the world. We're told that almost half of the items shipped into the U.S. come through the 36 ports where dock workers are on strike. Experts say the nation's supply chain is stronger after the pandemic because companies learned from it, but some shoppers tell Action News this feels all too familiar.
I know how, the whole thing kind of affected us during COVID, so I'm hoping that it's not going to get to that extent where people are having to hoard in, and you come to these stores and things are out of, you can't find them on the shelf. Just like the way I'm out here again the third time. I'm in this house. So.
And as for negotiations looking ahead, the Biden administration is upping the pressure on the shipping industry to offer a better deal to the union. They're encouraging both sides to continue talking to come to an agreement. Reporting live here in South Philadelphia, Corey Davis, Channel 6 Action News.
A lot of people have their dues too. Thank you, Corey.
All right, so that is everything from that particular news stream. So we're going to go ahead to the next one. Something that we should pay attention to. Let me see if I can go back into my history. I had it earlier. All right. So let's take our time to go to this one right here.
For the latest on the dock workers strike, now in its second day, tens of thousands of dock workers at ports along the East and Gulf continue to walk the picket lines. Here in our area, the panic buying among consumers has now started at the Costco and Teterboro. People could be seen stocking up on essentials over fears that the strike could have impacts on our supply chain. New Jersey reporter Anthony Johnson is live at the Port of Elizabeth with the very latest. Anthony.
Yeah, as you can see, the dock workers are still behind me. They are still standing their ground. At this point in time, no new word or any talks between management and the union. But the union workers say they're going to be out here as long as it takes so they can get a fair contract. Now, you talked about the people going to the store, customers going to the store. A lot of people online very early this morning before that at Costco actually open. Of course, this is the Jewish high holy day, so a lot of those folks were going shopping because of that one fact. But a lot of people also said they're getting prepared for the possibility that supplies will come up short. Long lines at one of the local big retailers may be the result of a frenzy of shoppers worried about supply shortages, especially if the dock workers strike lasts a long time.
We are scared because we don't know. It's like going over with COVID again. People rushing the stores, everybody's panicking. And that's why I'm here today.
I came in at 9:30. I was waiting online because I know people panic every time they hear something.
Some shoppers are not panic shopping, but when you mix in the fact that the Jewish high holy days are here, the crowds are unusually large.
I didn't come here because of the strike. I just came here because I legit, every month I come to Costco, but now there's people panic shopping.
In the meantime, the striking longshoremen are manning the picket lines for a second day in a row. It's estimated the U.S. economy is losing billions each day. The head of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association says this strike could hit small businesses in the state hard and fast.
The small business, they get shut down quickly because they're relying upon those things coming in on a regular basis to actually fund 100%, to build 100% of what they're putting out by way of products.
This graph from the New York Waterfront Commission from 2019 to 2020 shows the salaries of dock workers in our region, with some making hefty salaries. But workers say the numbers don't reflect the dangers of the job or take into account their work during COVID. A technology expert says if the walkout persists, some popular holiday presents may not be in stock because of a semiconductor shortage. Many of those are shipped from overseas.
This will determine whether or not there's a good holiday and a strong economy or a recession and you know, Scrooge coming along and holding back the gifts that consumers love.
Yeah, once again, you saw that graph there showing the salaries of dock workers here in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, but that does not reflect dock workers in other places. Remember, this strike goes all the way from Maine down to Texas, and hearing from the ILA yesterday, they said some of their workers in some of those other ports make just over the minimum wage, so a fair contract is vital for them and their families. That's the latest slide from Elizabeth. Eyewitness News.
Okay, so as you can see and hear, people are already becoming concerned and they're panic shopping. Now, something that is very important, I did this for the video earlier and I can't find it now, so I'm going to go through and try to find it while I am preparing for the next stream or for the next video. However, one of the things that the experts have already said that people should not do is to panic shop. To not panic because of the whole situation that is going on with the ports. Because that's the very thing that often leads to things being unavailable on the shelves. So we're going to go ahead to this next one right here.
East and Gulf Coast of the United States, they trade worldwide. Just because they're on those coasts doesn't mean, for example, that there's not a cargo coming across the world. I was looking at an index today that had containers coming from Australia that will be transferred over to other ships that will eventually wind up in these ports. So we have cargo coming in from around the world. The East and Gulf Coast ports represent anywhere between 45 to 50% of the total import-export containers in and out of the United States.
So it obviously has a big reach. So can you explain for us, please, not only the impact it may have like on America itself, but globally? What are we talking about when we say global impacts if these negotiations are going to be protracted?
Well, every day that the strike goes on, what you start seeing is ships will begin to back up. And this is where it has a global implication. We saw this with the Houthis when the Houthis diverted ships around Africa. We saw all of a sudden the global supply chain really get strained. In the case of the East Coast, Gulf Coast of the United States, when containers aren't offloaded or loaded, those containers are taken out of the cycle. In other words, they're not moving. The way we move containers around the world is like a symphony of movement. Everything has to flow very, very nicely, and all of a sudden, it's like being on a 4-way highway, and all of a sudden you go down to 3 lanes. It's going to create congestion. It's going to create backlog. And what you can conceivably see is all of a sudden containers destined for the United States are going to be offloaded and put into terminals in Singapore, in Jeddah, in Oman, and in Port Algeciras. And what this means is that as those ports get congested, we may see containers flowing to other places, not being able to be loaded or moved. And so this has global impact because the United States is such a large consumer and producer of goods. So many containers are being used in the system that when we have a shutdown, it has global implications.
What are we talking when we say goods? What are we seeing coming out from these ports?
So in terms of imports coming in, I mean, it's largely manufactured goods, a lot of goods that are going into the big, what we call box stores in the United States, the Walmart, the large kind of consumer items, a lot of manufacturing goods, a lot of home fabrication material going in. In terms of exports, we're talking about exporting farm machinery. We're talking about cars going out. We're talking about appliances and other manufactured goods that are made in the United States. And one of the biggest is agriculture. Even though agriculture tends to go in these large bulk vessels, some agriculture goes out in smaller vessels. And that's why this has such an impact. The other ports in the United States on the West Coast, for example, cannot absorb all this cargo coming in.
And so we talk about that this potentially has the exports anyway have effect on inflation and the economy on that side of things. If you're able to, can you explain why that is, that we could potentially see consumers paying the price for all this backlog?
Well, we're already seeing the main ocean carriers imposing surcharges, delay costs on the fact that their ships may not be able to sail because they're going to be held up waiting for the ports to clear. And whenever you ship a good on an ocean carrier, they always have that provision in there that you will pay the added expense. The ocean carriers don't pay the expense. It's the consumers that pay the expense. And what we're going to see here is these delays will start translating into higher costs. Higher costs equals inflation, and that means goods just all of a sudden go up. We've been watching freight rates kind of decline here recently, but I think we're going to expect to see a sharp upturn in those freight rates, particularly going across the Pacific over to the west coast of the United States, as those ports are wide open for business right now.
Right, and so I guess this isn't the first sort of disruption to global supply chains in terms of freight. Is this just going to exacerbate? We've had the Houthi rebels, we've had Suez Canal, COVID. Is the supply chain already fraught, and this being sort of, I guess, the straw that broke the camel's back?
I don't think this is straw that's going to break the camel's back. The issue that's really unique about this is not like a black swan event. This is about as white swan as you can get. We saw this coming. Everybody knew 6 years ago this contract had a due date that it was going to expire on September 30th at midnight. The issue here is that we didn't do enough to prevent the strike from happening. And I think one of the things that this may focus on attention on is really paying attention to issues like this, making sure that there's not any, the big thing about it is not making the news. That there's a nice peaceful handover, there's a new contract in place. I think right now what we're seeing in the United States is the International Longshoremen Association, the ILA, has the opportunity to grab the headlines, and that's exactly what they're doing right now. Very turbulent time in the United States with a political election coming up, and this is their opportunity to really make the news in an area that's crucially important but doesn't get a lot of attention.
All right, so there you have that. So you see the big impact of how this could affect the global chain. So if these ports can't get out, they're essentially the stuff that pretty much stays there or will go into other countries, like you mentioned, Singapore and things like that. Now we're going to go into the cost of it. Let's see. Let me go back to my history. I could try to find that. I'm usually a lot more prepared than this, but had a whole lot of setbacks with this. So here we go. Let's start.
October 1st, port workers across the eastern United States have gone on strike. These are some of the major ports affected along the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico, and it takes tens of thousands of dock workers to run them. They're the people operating cranes, securing containers, processing paperwork. That all grinds to a halt. Their bosses are reportedly offering a 50% wage increase over the next 6 years, but the union wants 77%. That would put top earners at around the $69 an hour mark in the final year of their contract. 77%, 69 is 77% higher than 39, which is what they currently make. If they can't find a middle ground, if the strike continues, the cost to the American economy is somewhere between 4.5 and $7.5 billion US a week in lost product, lost revenue, and potentially indefinite delays on roughly half of all US ocean imports.
We're also tracking tonight what could be a potentially crippling port strike.
The walkout threatens to disrupt the entire U.S. economy,
leading to delays in goods and possible price increases.
But those are just headlines that you'll see on TV or online. To get at the true cost to the U.S. economy, you have to dig a little below the surface.
So again, what he is essentially discussing with us is that, and on the surface, this is about just simply, trying to get a negotiation. But this is again focusing a lot on the workers having job security through their wages and making sure that automation does not affect their livelihood. And we'll get into more of that as we start getting into some of the talks of the interview, which I may have to come and do a part 2 on because I did not bring my charger. I ended up doing this from my house. And then I had to come here to try to get a better signal and stuff. And now I left the charger, so I'm going to have to go back and do a part 2 on this possibly tomorrow. So make sure you stand around for that. But in the meantime, let's go into more of the cost of delays and dominoes.
So I'm going to actually do my best not just to throw a bunch of numbers at you, because let's face it, I could tell you that the top 5 negotiating ports handle something like 1.5 million 20-foot equivalent units of volume, valued at $83.7 billion US last August. But I've just told you a lot without telling you anything. Almost anything you can think of that's imported is now potentially frozen in time.
Effectively, all 15,000 different types of good categories enter the United States through these ports. It really runs the spectrum of industrial inputs and burials to things we eat fairly frequently.
Bananas, chocolate, dairy, coffee, tea, spices, alcohol, tobacco, clothing, shoes, cars, toys, furniture, and raw materials too, like wood, cotton, and tin. These are the top 25 imported commodities into the U.S. by weight, and you can see the list covers everything from tires to tableware, screws, steel, and space heaters. I heard one analyst tell ABC News that this strike is going to be very disruptive because you can't just take all of this freight and pile it onto planes. You also can't expect West Coast ports to pick up the slack because they're way out of the way and they can't just double their processing volume overnight. So the way that analyst told it, there is no plan B here. And if the ports shut down, that has a domino effect right on down the line.
If the strike goes on, let's say a couple weeks, you'd start seeing warehouses, laying people off temporarily. Some trucking companies that move freight around the ports would have to start laying off individuals.
Even the food industry that feeds those tens of thousands of dock workers every day.
The East Coast ports are handling about $3 trillion of imports and another $3 trillion of exports every year. So if you think of that's the materials that are supporting the jobs and the imports, and those are the materials that are being produced and the exports, that turns into literally millions and millions of jobs.
Effectively, the entire supply chain gets hit. That has the potential to drive up shipping costs, which then get passed on to you. And this is all very bad news. But right now, no expert that I've heard from said we should all be fearful of some crazy inflationary spike that'll somehow upend the entire U.S. economy all over again. And I'll explain why. The
first thing that's important to mention is that even though U.S. dock workers are on strike, we don't know how long they'll be on strike. And that matters because ports shut down temporarily all the time. Just think of any time there's really extreme weather. You don't just keep working through hurricane force winds, and yet life goes on. So a short strike, say a couple of days, may not be so disruptive.
We know anytime a disruption happens, sort of the initial day or two tends not to be that pronounced with this, but then your amount of disruption starts increasing even more rapidly as time goes on.
And let's say the strike does go on for a long time, several weeks, billions of dollars in the economy lost. Well, a lot of those losses eventually get reversed.
If we have shortages at the retail level, that demand actually isn't going to go away, for example. So if I need to purchase Christmas gifts for my children, just because they're not available in October doesn't mean I won't buy them in November or even December when they're available.
Now, not everything is made whole again. Some goods perish. Fresh products, dairy, these are things with relatively short supply chains, very time sensitive. Those can be true losses. But as business picks up again, the much more pressing issue becomes how to resolve the backlog, as opposed to whether we see entire companies permanently folding or the price of certain goods permanently going up. And a big reason for that is that many of America's biggest companies saw this coming.
Businesses have also been stocking up on additional inventory in anticipation of a strike.
About the end of July, early August, there was a definite spike in the volume of containers being handled. And that directly attributable to the fact that shipments are being rerouted, shipments are being expedited to bring in additional equipment.
Now, some companies are going to have a harder time than others. Walmart relies heavily on imports, for example. More than half of its goods come in from overseas. A company like Costco, on the other hand, gets its food mainly by land. And that's true for the vast majority of food in the U.S. The governor of New York is even urging residents, do not stockpile food. Overall, it'll be fine.
We don't think there'll be disruption to the food supply. We still have plentiful food coming in from Canada, our own state, California, and Mexico. So I just want everybody to not have that the concerns about the food supply as well.
Except bananas. The U.S. barely grows those. So here's the bottom line. Yes, a strike of this magnitude is potentially devastating. We haven't seen a strike like this in almost half a century. But if it's short, the world won't end. And it's worth keeping in mind that the U.S. president has the power to make this a short strike. For the time being, he says he has no plans to intervene. But the law allows him to force workers back to work, suspending the strike for up to 80 days. That's what George W. Bush did 22 years ago, after an 11-day strike by West Coast dock workers. Now, there is a political cost to doing this, especially when you need union votes ahead of a presidential election. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce also has more than a few votes, and they've urged Joe Biden to shut the strike down, calling a disruption on this scale unconscionable.
So there you have it for now, you guys. I'm gonna have to come back later. Let's see if I can stop the presenting the screen. So I'm gonna have to come back later, so that way we can have our part 2 and we can start discussing more about the economic destabilization. Get my camera on. So before I get more into that, before I officially end and have a part 2 later, I'm going to share with you all on ChatGPT something else that I wanted to make note of when it comes to everything involving the strike. So one thing I did was make sure that I checked on how does this port strike affect, economic collapse and things like that, particularly here when it comes to the United States. All right. So I basically All right, you all. So back home. So I'm going to go ahead and just end the live stream, and then edit so that way that the the stream will make it up to the port strikes and not the port strikes, the cost of the port strikes, and then we'll do a part 2 tomorrow. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.